customizing attributes, groups, and views. Okay, so in the last nugget, we spent a lot of time looking at the agent and looking at the computers that are in our environment and really taking a look at the things that we're interested in monitoring. We looked at monitors, we looked at rules, we looked at the various ways that we can pull data off of those clients and bring it into our operations manager infrastructure. In that nugget, we talked about customizing our management packs and how we can take the management packs that we've brought in by default and provide some tuning elements to them to make them work for our environment. Now that we have this data in our operations manager infrastructure, what we want to do is make it in a way or present it in a way that makes sense to the administrators of our environment. And that's what we're going to do here. The process of creating new views allows us to take the information that we've pulled in and present it in a way that makes sense to the people that are using that or consuming that data. Think about the administrators in your environment. They may be Exchange administrators, or they may be SQL administrators, or they may be the server administrators that take care of the care and feeding of the individual servers in your environment. Depending on who they are and what sorts of responsibilities they have in your environment, they may be interested in different sets of data. And in this nugget, we're going to show how you can create new views that provide them the access to just those sets of data. In this nugget, we're going to create some new views. We're going to show you the process by which you can create new views and also how to add those views to the My Workspace view, the My Workspace node, so that you'll have your own custom set of views that make sense to you that you're interested in. And we're going to talk about how you can actually create and filter down the information that you have by computer groups. This gives you the ability to, say, take all of that data that's coming in, all of that event data and all of that alert data that's coming in, and provide a view that is specific to, again, that Exchange group, maybe just the Exchange servers, or for the SQL group, just those SQL servers. And we're also going to talk about how you can create additional attributes, or the ability to discover additional attributes on those computers and present those attributes in the views. What this allows you to do is look at specific registry keys or specific WMI information on a computer and present that in the view so that someone can look at those specific information, those specific customizations. Now I want to start by minimizing this and going back to our Operations Manager console. We've seen this before. We've seen the monitoring node before when we were talking about the day-to-day Operations Manager operations or making use of the monitoring itself. You'll see we have the computers node here. We have some of the other nodes that are available as well. Now if you remember a couple of nodes ago, or a couple of nuggets ago, when we were talking about importing in management packs, we imported in a SQL Server management pack, we imported in an Active Directory management pack, and then one that related to Microsoft Windows clients and servers. And you'll see here now down in our list of available folders here, we have a Microsoft SQL Server and a Windows Active Directory folder, and we also have one associated with Microsoft Windows Client, Windows Server. When I add management packs into my Operations Manager infrastructure, one of the things it's going to do is actually create a set of predefined views for me of the data that relates to that particular part of my infrastructure. You know, the management pack includes all that logic, all that built-in logic for working with the agent and identifying the elements that are of importance on those computers, but what it also does is actually create a useful view for me that I can then present to administrators based on information that may be of interest to them associated with those computers. Here's Microsoft SQL Server, for example. If I click here under Active Alerts, this will show me for the SQL servers in my environment what are the active alerts that are presently related to them. You'll see here's that Service Pack Compliant alert that I keep up here so we have an alert to work with. Again, if I tailor down to just computers, I can actually look at just the computers that have SQL Server installed on them. In my environment, both computers have SQL Server installed on them, but the computers node gives the ability to look at the health, for example, of the database engine here. One is healthy and one is warning. If I look at task status, if I have any tasks that are currently being run on those computers, I can view the tasks here. What I also have are a number of additional folders here related to SQL Server. Again, these are part of those default management pack that provide me a little bit more data about, for example, the free space associated with the databases. Maybe some information about the state of those databases. If you remember, the management pack includes the logic that it goes down to the client, it goes down to the agent and says, "Agent, tell me all this information about SQL Server in my environment." And the agent pulls back information, for example, that related to the databases and the states of those. Those are built into the management packs themselves. In the last nugget, we actually created custom monitors and rules related to that logic that allows us to adjust the information that's being brought in. But in that last nugget, all we did was adjust what the data is that's being brought into the database. Now that we have that data brought into the database, the next thing we need to do is present it in a way that makes sense to the administrators that are using this as their monitoring solution. We're going to do that in this nugget. The first thing that I want to show you is related to some of the properties of these default views that appear whenever we import in a management pack. I'm going to right-click here under Database State and choose Properties. If you'll see, when I bring up the Properties node, everything in here is grayed out at present. The reason why it's grayed out is because that management pack that we imported is a sealed management pack, which means that none of the default settings can actually be changed. If I click over here on the Display node, you'll see which of the columns are available for display, and if I try to click in the checkboxes, I'm not allowed to actually click in the checkboxes. Because Microsoft has provided the ability to seal those management packs, what we see here in terms of these available views are not able to be changed. And so for us to create the views that are useful for our users, if they're somewhat different than the ones that are available by default, we need to create those as separate custom views. Now we have the ability to view display and show the columns that are available for display. We can sort the columns by various elements and even group items by various elements. You'll see here under the criteria node, we can show data related to, in this case, the SQL database. This is the targeting function that we talked about before. And then also the data contained in a specific group. What this is saying is if a computer is related to SQL database, if it fulfills the discovery logic associated with those that have SQL databases on them, we're going to show them as part of this view. Later on, I'm going to show you how we can even tailor it down even further so that we can tailor our specific information down to groups of computers based on computer name or based on the fulfillment of various queries associated with that group. But these are default groups. Again, we can't really modify these groups. In order to create new views, we actually have to go down here to actually create a new view. Let's do that now. You'll notice that we have a new view element down here that says new view down here in the bottom, and it's grayed out. Again, I'm not going to be able to create a new view in this location because that new view isn't necessarily going to be related to the databases, the hard-coded databases folder that has been created as part of that management pack. But one thing that we did do in the last nugget was we created our own management pack here called My Server Performance. In that management pack in the last nugget, we used that to create some monitors and rules that were specific to the characteristics of our environment. Now let's say that we want to create a new view here under My Server Performance. Again, this is related to that management pack that we created. You'll see new view is now available to us, and if we click here, we have the option of creating a number of different view types. We have an alert view, which shows us various alerts, and the alerts that have actually been forwarded to the Operations Manager console as part of the agents. We have events, where we can actually view different events that have been brought into the console as well. We have the state view, which shows us essentially what we're seeing there on the right associated with whether a system is healthy or not, or an element is healthy or not. We can look at performance data through a performance view. We can look at the composition of various computers in relation to each other with the diagram view. A task status view shows me the different tasks that have been identified for computers that are in that group. A web page view and a dashboard view give me more high-level roll-up information associated with those computers as well. Let's actually start by creating a simple alert view. If I create an alert view, the first thing I need to do is give it a name. We'll just call this My Alert View. Alert View. And I need to give it a criteria. You'll see here that initially that the criteria will show me data related to just the entity icon. And the entity element really is related to all of the things in my environment. If I create this view based on simply just entity alone, I'm going to view all of the alerts based on all of the computers in my environment today. What I want to do perhaps is actually target down that view by choosing the Select a Target Type button and maybe just tailor it down to something that's a little bit more interesting to me. Let me actually switch so I'm viewing just some common targets. I'm going to scroll down here, and instead of viewing Entity, which is every computer in my environment, maybe I'm just interested in the Windows Server 2003 computers in my environment. Or maybe the Windows clients in my environment, or the virtual servers in my environment. I'm going to start here by choosing Windows Server 2003 computer. What this does is it allows me to target that data down to just those computers in my environment that are Windows Server 2003. Now I can add characteristics or elements that I want to further tailor down those list of alerts that are available to me. Maybe I'm only interested in alerts of a specific severity. If I click this checkbox, I can choose the specific severity of interest to me, and maybe I want to focus it just on critical views. I can say a specific priority or created by specific sources, for example. I can tailor that down to just specific sources that are related to what the data that the agent is bringing into my environment. As you'll see here, there's a lot of characteristics that I can use to tailor this information down. My suggestion to you is, whenever you're creating new views, you may want to create the views based off of what you're seeing in the default view information. You're going to start out by seeing lots and lots and lots of views in the main view area up at the top of our monitoring node that we showed earlier today. And you're going to see those, and you're going to think to yourself, well, I really want to see a view based off of this. And I really want to tailor out just those views for just this group of people. That'll help you actually identify, based off of all these sources and all these severities and priorities, which are going to be useful to you. I can also choose here under Display to choose which columns are of interest to me when I display that data. You'll see here I have severity and icon and source and maintenance mode. All of these are here by default. But I have a number of different columns that I can add to that view to provide additional information in that view itself. I can also sort those items and group those items by default. That's just the default view. My users, once I create that, will be able to resort the columns as they see necessary, but this does that for the initial view. Let me go ahead and click OK here, and you'll see that this view actually gets created. You'll see my alert view. Here now I have all of the alerts that are related, that are based on critical alerts that are related to my environment today. I see here logical drive holding the Active Directory database is low. I see a couple of other alerts related to OLEDB and some performance module stuff. This is stuff that we've seen in our environment throughout all the nuggets to this point. But what we've done is tailor down a view so that it relates to just those critical alerts. I can create other view types as well. If I go back to my server performance and create a new view, I can create a state view, for example. A state view has a couple of different entities that are different elements that are going to be different than the alert view that we saw before. Let's give it a name, my state view. And here again, instead of choosing information related to just the entity or the top level diagram, let's target this down to something else. Maybe Active Directory domain controller servers, for example. There's an Active Directory domain controller server 2003 computer role. This is going to tailor this information down to just those computers that relate to that server role. Maybe I can add in with a specific health state or with a specific host name or a specific role associated with that. Maybe I want to change the display data to what the host name is and whether or not it's the domain naming master or the schema master or the PDC emulator role holder or the RID master. I can add all of these in so that that becomes part of the information that is displayed as part of the state view. Same thing with sorting and grouping of columns. If I create the new view, you'll see that that view gets created in the same location as the other view, and I can take a look now at the DC nugget, which is the only domain controller in my environment, and see information about which one is the schema master and the PDC emulator and the RID master. And so all of this essentially provides more data to the people that are looking at my Operations Manager console so that they can get a better understanding of how my computers are operating and what their behaviors are and how healthy they are today. For any of these views, if you want to add them into your workspace, you can do so by right-clicking on any view and choosing Add to My Workspace. You'll see here that when you add that view to your workspace, you can actually create a new name or a different name for that view, and even the folder in which you want to create that. If you want to create it under a new folder, perhaps I'll create a folder called State Views. And put that My State View under the folder State Views, I can do so. If I click the OK button here and go back to my workspace, you'll see that we now have a folder that's been created with this state view located in it. This allows us, not only if we're in the console, but if we're in the web console, of having just the views that make sense to us. Your job as an Operations Manager administrator is to assist the other teams in your environment, the other IT administrators in your environment, by providing them the views of data that are important to them. You're going to control the data. You're going to control what data can be presented to what individuals in your environment. And you're going to provide data to them, or the access to that data, based off of what they need. We'll find out a little later on when we talk about setting security options with how you can actually tailor out which views are seen by which individuals in your environment. But for now, know that your job really is to take a look at these views after you've identified what the monitoring needs are, and really providing a good sense of data that is useful for the other administrators in your environment. Now, we talked about how there are ways to actually tailor out the data that's coming in that may go into a particular view by a computer group. Let's actually talk about how we might do that. I'm going to go back and view the properties of this view a little bit, and you'll see here that we show data contained in a specific group. You'll see here that that group is currently set to all. If I click the little plus sign or the little ellipses here, you're going to see that these are all the groups that are available for me for tailoring down that data. Maybe I want to talk about RODC groups or SQL computers or agentless managed computer groups. This allows me to tailor that data down to just the computers that are members of that group. The way in which we actually go about creating new groups, though, is back here under the authoring node. You'll see under the authoring node we have an element here called groups. These groups are related to just the groups that we saw inside of the views earlier on. Let's actually go ahead and create a new group. We do this by right-clicking on the Groups node and choosing to create a new group. Now, as you'll see as we bring up the wizard for creating that new group, we have a number of different ways, specifically two, in which we can actually add computers into this new group. We can add them explicitly, meaning by name, or we can add them dynamically, meaning by their fulfillment of a particular query. Let's go ahead and create a new name. We'll call it My Group of Interesting Computers. And I need to, when I create a new group, associate that group with a destination management pack, which in this case is going to be My Server Performance. I choose the Next button, and I have now the option of explicitly identifying group members. I do this by clicking the Add Remove Objects button. You'll see here I can search for groups based off essential services, or FAN, or file replication, or entity, or what have you. In this case, I'm just going to choose by entity. And let's say I'm looking for the computer scom nugget. Hit the search button here, and you'll see that the scom nugget has a number of different elements associated with it. It's the fact that it's a computer, some more information about it, for example. I can add that computer information into the selected objects here by choosing the Add button and choosing OK. This now adds that computer in as a selected group member. But the process of adding in group members to the explicit mechanism may not be as dynamic as you need. Think about your environment. Think about the servers as they change and move, or new computers come in and old computers go out in your environment. If you add explicit group members into a group, and over time, maybe 6 months or a year or a couple of years go by, you may find that some of these group objects may not necessarily be relevant anymore. And so a better way may be not necessarily to add those objects directly, but instead to add them dynamically. Now you'll see here we have another option called Dynamic Inclusion Rules. What this does is it uses a query or a formula to actually populate that group membership. Let's talk about how we would do that. I'm going to click the Create Edit Rules button here, and you'll see that instead of actually identifying objects directly, instead I'm actually allowed to create objects or create a query that will help identify those objects for me. If you're used to Configuration Manager, in Configuration Manager there's the concept of collections, where a collection is created by a computer's fulfillment of a particular query. This is pretty much the same as how it's done in Configuration Manager. In this case, I've added a class called Windows Computer. And what I'm doing here is identifying, instead of just the direct computers, but instead computers by certain attributes. Perhaps whether or not that virtual machine, that computer is a virtual machine. In this case, I'd say virtual machine equals true. I could add in another one if I want. Maybe DNS domain name equals nuggetlab.com. I can add in additional classes as well by clicking the down arrow and choosing from the available classes that I have here in the drop-down list. Different classes provide me different characteristics by which I can add in computer information. Here's one based on sysvol for Windows Server 2008, the name, the display name, for example. Let's say, for example, I want to create just on these two. I'm going to go ahead and create this group based off of whether or not it's a virtual machine and whether or not its DNS domain name equals nuggetlab.com. If I hit the OK button here, you'll see that the query formula is created using more or less natural English for exactly what I've created through the query builder. If I choose the Next button, I have the option of adding in subgroups that relate into this group. Now, those subgroups can be other groups that have some bearing on this group. They can have different queries based on how those groups are brought in. But the effective solution here is I create subgroups so that I can create different queries and relate those queries into a single group. I choose the button here to add in individual groups as necessary. If I want, I can search on those groups and add those into the query as necessary. I can also actually choose to exclude certain members or certain objects associated with this query. Perhaps I've created all virtual machines and all virtual machines that are nuggetlab.com, but maybe I want to exclude out specific objects as well. Maybe I want to exclude out scom nugget out of that characteristic. And I can do that here by excluding it out directly. In this case, I'm not going to necessarily do that. Once I'm done with that, I can create the group. The group actually gets copied into my management pack, and that group can then be used by that management pack for adjusting how I want to perceive or view information inside of my views. Let's go back to the monitoring node and take a look at a couple of the views that we created here. Here we have my state and my alert view. Let's go back and view properties of that view. Before, we talked about how we right now don't actually have that data tailored down to specific groups. But if we hit the ellipsis button here, we can actually go look down for the view that we just created. You'll see that now in that list of groups is my group of interesting computers. If I hit the OK button now, that data is going to be tailored down to just my group of interesting computers as I've defined that group when I created the group earlier on. I can save the view, and now I have more information that is specific to how I've tailored down those computers. The last thing that I want to show you in this nugget is related to attributes. Now you'll see back when we were talking about management pack objects, we were looking at monitors and rules earlier. There's another element in here called attributes that we want to actually take a look at. These attributes are actually attributes that are collected or discovered by the operations manager agent and brought into the database. You'll see here that they relate to things like whether or not that server is a virtual node or not, what its principal name is, what its DNS name is, what its NetBIOS computer name is. We actually can't take a look at the properties of these individual attributes, but what we can do is actually create a new attribute. We're going to go ahead and create a new attribute now. We're actually going to create an attribute, and what we're going to do is with this attribute is create an attribute to see whether or not a registry value is available for us. Let's actually do that now. Is registry value there? Click the next button, and you'll see that we have two different discovery types for determining whether or not an attribute is available for us on that computer. We have a registry value and a WMI query. The registry value allows us to identify, well, go ahead and look in the registry and find out if this attribute is actually in the registry or not, or what its value may be. I can also choose WMI query to run a WMI query and have the results of that query brought back into my database. The reason why I would do this is because maybe the default management pack is not pulling in the data that is of interest to me. And I want to pull in more data about the configuration or information from WMI about the performance of that server or the behaviors of that server. I can do that by creating that new attribute. Let's choose a registry attribute for now. I need to choose a target and a destination management pack. In this case, the target I'm going to choose is Windows Server 2003 computers, just like before. And the management pack I'm going to choose is my server performance. Now you'll immediately notice that when I created the target as Windows Server 2003 computer, I've added this underscore extended to the target. The reason for that is because the original Windows Server 2003 computer target cannot actually be modified because, again, it is a sealed management pack. And so by default, Operations Manager will create an extended target for you so that it can save those into your management pack, My Server Performance. The next thing I need to do is actually identify the key or the value that I'm interested in looking at. Maybe I'm interested in looking at whether or not it has a software key or not. The attribute type I'm looking for here is checking to see if the software key actually exists. And then also, how often do I want to check to see if that registry key is on my server? I can change the attribute type here to looking for strings or integers or floats if I'm interested, or just a binary value for whether or not that key actually exists. If I click the Finish button here, it'll actually create that attribute and assign that attribute to the target that I have here. If I change my scope down and actually clear all of the values out, you'll see that if I scroll over here, I now have a Windows Server 2003 computer extended target related to the My Server Performance Management Pack. I want to take a look at this. And if I open this up and look at it inside of my attributes, you'll see that the new attribute that I've created is registry value there, is now available for me in this extended value. The other ones from the original Windows Server 2003 computer attribute list are available as well, from that target are available as well. Now you may be asking at this point, how does Operations Manager actually go and identify whether that registry value is there? What process does it actually go through to go pull that information off of the agent? You'll notice that we have this node here called Object Discoveries. This is the process by which Operations Manager instructs an agent to go actually see if that registry value is there. You'll see here for the target that we actually created before, we now have an Is Registry Value There discovery. Let's actually take a look at that. I'm going to view the properties of that, and you'll see here that we have some general information. It is currently enabled. We're currently looking at the Is Registry Value There string. That's the details that we're trying to find about it. And what it actually creates is an XML configuration file for passing down to that client for identifying, well, go find out whether this location actually exists or not. Just like before, I can add in some specific product knowledge if I want, and even overrides if I want to override that later on. This is an object discovery. This element will instruct the agent to actually go back and pull this information into the database. Now, how do I actually view this information once it's pulled into the database? That's done back here under the monitoring node. Let's say I have my server performance. Let's create another view here. I'm going to create a state view, and we'll call it is registry value there. What I want to do is actually change the data related to and change the targeting on it down to that extended target that I just created a while ago. I'm going to open this up here and choose Windows Server 2003 Computer Extended. I click OK, and you'll see here I now have a number of different elements that I can choose. One is with specific is registry value there. So I can choose to select information in the view based on whether or not it's true or whether or not it's false. I can now also choose under display information to choose whether or not is registry value there is displayed in my list of columns. Once I've created this view, and actually the clients in my environment get populated with this information, I'll be able to create the view and do some things with that view. I actually have to choose specific here and change this to true. Click OK and OK, and the view is created. Now you'll notice that once we create this view, we have a healthy element here that shows the name, and we have a warning element that shows the name for DC Nugget. But we also have the value of whether or not is registry value is equal to true. What this tells us is that the agent has been contacted, and we do actually have that HKey local machine / software key available on both of these computers. So this gives us some information about the configuration of those computers via their registry information. I want to go back and show you one more time down here back under the authoring node where there is another type of attribute that can be created as well, and that's related to a WMI variable. So let's say my WMI query. Now these are a little bit more difficult to create, but if I click the next button and change that from registry to WMI query, obviously I'm going to have to change the target again back down to the extended node and change the management pack as well. I can enter in the specific WMI namespace, query, and also the property name here that I'm interested in pulling out of WMI. If you can build a WQL query that pulls any sort of data out of WMI, you can use this create attribute wizard to pull those values over a particular frequency here, in this case it's 900 seconds, at any point from any of the computers in your environment, and then populate that into the view. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about the process of customizing what your administrators in your environment are going to see out of Operations Manager. We've done that through the process of creating views and groups and attributes. We've created some new views. We've even added those views into my workspace. And then we've filtered that information down by computer groups. And lastly, we've talked about some additional information that may not come as part of our monitors that are come as part of attributes, and how we can create those attributes and how they generate object discoveries, and also how we can take those attributes and pull them into our views. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.